Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carlos Felipe Jaramillo. I'm the VP of the World Bank for LATAM and the Caribbean, and I would like to welcome you to this event, Climate Action, Latin America's and the Caribbean's opportunity for leading change. Today, it's my great pleasure to have a conversation on this topic with the Minister of Environment of Chile, Maïnza Rojas. We are more than welcome, Madam Minister. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good evening to everyone. Thank you for the invitation to this conversation. Our pleasure, Madam Minister. Today at the World Bank, we are publishing a roadmap for climate action in Latin America and the Caribbean, in which we make a call to countries for new accelerated action for climate. This report also contains a response on the side of the World Bank in order to support countries with regards to their adaptation measures and the plans that they may have towards low carbon economies. So let's get started with one question, Maïsa. In this report, we have underscored that the region has the opportunity to lead the change that we require through actions in the systems having to do with natural landscapes, cities, energy, and transport. These actions can also generate huge economic, social, and environmental benefits. From the standpoint of your mission, what are the opportunities that we have as a region when it comes to leading the change and for becoming part of the global solution, both in technological and social and economic terms? And how can we reconcile this struggle to deal with climate change and at the same time assure a more prosperous and inclusive future? Well, what a question, right? Well, the first thing I would like to say is that if we do not face up to the challenge posed by climate change, which is connected with the crisis having to do with the loss of biodiversity, we will have no chance of enabling a more prosperous future for our region, for its inhabitants, talking about Latin America and the Caribbean. So that is the first thing I would like to assert. So if we believe that nowadays the challenges are huge and sound or seem unsurmountable if we think that the world is complex enough as it is, and it is difficult to make decisions when it comes to addressing this crisis, we should think that today's world is a world that is experiencing global warming by 1 degree, and we are seeing a number of significant impacts as it is. Imagine what the world would look like with an increase in our temperature of 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is even an ambitious objective. So I think that one of the first things that we should do as a region is to integrate and to cooperate. There are shared challenges, and these shared challenges should help us to enable us to hold conversations on how to address these challenges together. Before becoming minister, before being a scientist, something that helped us quite a bit in Chile over the past few years, and which we have started to develop side by side with other Latin American countries, is that the decisions that we need to make, the decisions that need to be made by our countries become easier. They can be channeled better when they are evidence-based. And we should leverage our academic and scientific communities so that they may help us to generate this evidence that we have, and let us trust them with helping us to interpret this evidence so that this may provide us for a better decision-making framework. When we take a look at GHG emissions on a worldwide basis, the percentages are becoming quite high on the energy side. In Chile, almost 80% of emissions come from energy, but there are countries elsewhere in Latin America that are seeing significant percentages of emissions, like, for example, in the agricultural sector. So this has been considered as a more complex issue, but right now, the war in Ukraine is leading to a lack in fertilizers, a shortage of fertilizers. And as a result of this, we are again talking about food security. For a while, we have not been talking about food security. Anyway, this was an issue that raised its ugly head during the pandemic, but now it is in the limelight again. So the changes that we may introduce in agriculture may enable greater food security, may help us reduce GHG emissions. And as a matter of fact, if we for example, take care of composting our waste instead of throwing food waste out, we would have natural fertilizers as a result. So there is an ensemble of decisions that can be made in order to derive benefits from several objectives that we have as a region. I believe that another big lesson that is being given by Europe with the war in Ukraine is that dependence on just one source of energy goes against resilience. It removes our capability of facing up to this disturbance, which is in this case is a war. Even if we are far away geographically, this war is having an impact on us anyway. So this should lead us to understand that diversification is important when it comes to resilience. And it is resilience that will enable us to withstand shocks, not just the shock of a faraway war, but other associated shocks that are related with climate change, but other shocks such as the pandemic or the war right now. Thank you, Madam Minister. Now, for a second round of questions, I would like to focus on the effects of the climate crisis and how GHG emissions may intensify in the region because of irreversible impacts. Unfortunately, this touches the lower income populations more harshly. For us at the World Bank, this has been a reason for huge concern. For example, talking about migrations, so we have a number of projections that show that just because of the effect of the intensification of climate change, there already are displaced populations, people, communities that have had to leave their ancestral homes, people that used to live in areas that used to produce food in the past. And now we have up to 17 million potential climate refugees by 2050. So this is a projection that is quite worrying. Madam Minister, as a scientist as well and as a defender of environmental projects in Chile, what do you think are the biggest challenges that the region is being faced with when it comes to facing up to climate risks nowadays? I would like to say that, first of all, what we should do is get to know the risks. And for that, I would like to share an experience that we've had in Chile, which I think would be quite positive if we might be able to replicate it, because if we do not know the risks that we are exposed to, if we are not aware of our vulnerabilities or the threats that we are being faced with, it will be very difficult for us to really prepare. Together with the scientific community, the Ministry of Environment, a number of years ago, put together an atlas of climate risk by using the conceptual framework of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which enables us to see the threats, the exposures, and the vulnerabilities on a local level. This is a tool that is targeted on, and it would really be great on expanding that so as to be able to understand and assess risks so as to enable decision making. In addition to this, and I am going to relate this with migration. So we should really be aware of the impacts that we are already experiencing, having a record on a national basis or on a regional basis of the impacts that we are currently experiencing. That will allow us to quantify our adaptation-related needs. And I believe that being able to create those records, those registries in a systematic way should enable us to negotiate on an international basis so as to get financing for adaptation, as well as the creation of resilience. Resilience is critical, not just for our countries that intend to increase resilience amongst our communities, especially the most vulnerable ones in the face of the adverse effects of climate change, but also when it comes to preventing and minimizing migration. I think that deep down, this entails a benefit for developed countries to see that the rest of the world should be able to increase its resilience facing the adverse effects of climate change so as to prevent migrations, because nobody wishes to have to leave their original communities because it's the places where they find their cultural, social, and economic roots. But we do know that the impacts are already there. And if we do nothing, well, the consequences are there. We need to work hard to minimize those impacts. But I believe that it is necessary to adapt, to become more resilient, and to enable our communities to grow in a framework of well-being and inclusiveness. We know that this world, apart from being subjected to climate change, is bearing other types of shocks, such as the pandemic or, like what I mentioned before, the war. Thank you, Madam Minister. Let us now talk about the impact that climate change has when it comes to the growth and the well-being of people in the long term. I'm specifically talking about growth of the economy. We do know that the impacts of climate change can be quite significant in some sectors. For example, we were talking about the rural sector, agriculture, and this might seriously affect production, the income of families, jobs in the rural population. And this comes with side effects because the financial sector has granted loans and it may be affected when it comes to its capability of providing new loans. And this also affects public finance, because if agriculture is seriously affected, then the farmers will be unable to pay their taxes and the government will not be able to honor its commitments, and it will have to incur in greater and greater indebtedness. I'm particularly concerned about this variability and this intensification of droughts and floods. So I know that in some countries in South America, there have been very serious droughts that are happening year on year and which seriously affect the population and the economy in general. How can we, as the World Bank, as an international organization, how can we and other organizations who are so concerned about the situation, how can we help and support countries so as to facilitate transition towards a longer term vision that may help mitigate these impacts? Well, our countries will not be able to embrace this challenge all by themselves. That is why, as part of the Paris Agreement, there is also the engagement of getting financing for developing countries with this goal in mind. And this is critical, not just when it comes to helping countries to adapt and create resilience, it will also translate into benefits for developed countries, because if we have a world, an entire planet that is more resilient, we will be able to prevent forced migrations with all the related costs that entails. So of course we need this financing. So I think that negotiations should be maintained to make this a reality within the framework of Paris Agreement negotiations, because there are engagements that are a part of the Paris Agreement that need to be honored. There are a number of sovereign bonds. I am specifically thinking about one experience that Chile had, the green sovereign bonds, which were specifically associated to mitigation projects, that is, projects that will allow us reduce our GHG emissions. And this year, a new bond which was approved, sustainability bonds, which is associated to the engagements that the countries have in their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. As part of the Paris Agreement, each country hands in its NDCs. There are engagements that are associated to the NDCs can be helped by the sovereign linked bonds. So I think that this type of instrument and any other type of financing that may be associated to us being able to honor our engagements can be of great importance. Now, all countries have their NDCs because that's the engagement as part of the Paris Agreement, but not all countries have their long-term climate change strategies. The NDC establishes with what do I engage, but the strategy defines how I will engage in those commitments, what will I do? What actions will I engage in? So I think that as part of this, there can be cooperation in the region between the countries that do not have their strategy and those that do have it, because in this way, there is a clearer definition on how I will materialize the targets that I set forth in my NDC. And once I have identified those targets, I will also need financing in turn. So I think that this is like a virtuous cycle that we may use to make progress in the creation of resilience in association with the knowledge of how do I want to be resilient, or against what do I want to be resilient, or my risks and my threats. And in this way, I will be able to evaluate how I am successfully adapting, because there is one topic that has been a matter of concern for me, which is the report of the IPCC, which was published in February this year on maladaptation or poor adaptation. I think that this is a huge matter of concern, because we do know that we need financing for adapting. There is less financing if we compare this with mitigation, but if the little financing that is available is used to implement measures that produce poor adaptation or misadaptation, I think that this may be a matter of concern. So that is why it is so important to generate proper evidence so as to make good progress. Madam Minister Maisa Rojas, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. You are so knowledgeable and you're so engaged with the issues of climate change in not only in Chile, but also in our region. Actually, there was one more topic that I would have loved to include, and I think it is an opportunity as well. Latin America is a highly urbanized region. It has a high number of urban inhabitants, and for this reason, our cities in Latin America are cities that are highly polluted, and there are several measures that enable depolluting our cities and clearly improving the quality of life of their inhabitants, and at the same time reduce our GHG emissions. So I think that there are measures right there that can be quite synergistic. And I think that their good collaboration amongst Latin American countries might help us make greater progress and faster progress towards these kinds of measures. Madam Minister Maisa Rojas, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. It's a real pleasure for us to have people that are so knowledgeable and that are so highly engaged with this topic in the region. And as a matter of fact, at the World Bank, we believe that Latin America and the Caribbean can be leaders of change by leveraging our resources, our experience, and by generating more opportunities for growth that is greener and more inclusive. We also believe that adaptation responses um, entail great opportunities when it comes to job creation, and they help vulnerable communities to face extreme climate phenomena. I invite you to download and read the roadmap so as to accelerate climate action in the region, and I also invite you to join our discussion in our social media. Thank you so much for your attention.